Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Hartsacker from IIB Europe. Welcome to our weekly webinar. As we did last week, we're going to show off some consent management providers today, and we have three really cool products today to show you. We're starting off with Axel Springer. That will be their opt-in transparency layer, or OIL, which will be presented by Johannes Fenner and Sebastian Baschnik. We'll then have a demonstration of Sovereign's consent tool by Owen McGrath, and then we'll close it out with a demo of Share This's GDPR compliance tool by Spencer Owens. And then in the remaining time, we'll be here to answer your questions. Please make sure to address your question to the specific CMPs if you have a question about the CMPs. That helps me also kind of moderate the discussion a bit, and that way we know who to ask the question to. If you have questions about the framework in general, I'll try and answer those, but we would like to focus this opportunity on the CMPs to answer your questions. So to ask questions, by the way, there's a pane on the right-hand side of the screen, which is questions. You can type in your question there, and I'll read them out. Sorry, Owen, could you just mute yourself? Or ask your colleagues to mute themselves. I'm going to hand over presenter to Sebastian now. You guys have the floor whenever you get it up and running.
Hi everyone, thank you for having us. This is Johannes Fenner together with Sebastian Baschnik from Axel Springer. Before we jump into the technology of our solution that we've built, I would like to give you a little bit more context also about the German market, because we get quite a few questions on that from the industry. So in Germany, due to the Telemedia Act, which you consider the Lex Specialis for GDPR in Germany, we do not require an opt-in on our websites yet. So consent is not considered to be the legal basis in Germany yet. And that's why many people ask us, why haven't you rolled out the opt-in layer solution on your own websites yet? So that's the answer. So it's ready to be used, but we don't see the need yet in the short term on our German websites. Now you might ask the question, why does a publisher like Axel Springer build its own opt-in layer solution? Why don't you just use one of the managed services out there? And that's a fair question. To give you a little bit more context, the team that is now working on this project has started off as an A/B testing team to evaluate the effect of cookie banners on our websites in general. And in that context, we realized that there was no mature solution for the needs that we had out there. Let me give you a little bit more details on that. So what you see on the slide is what our OIL solution does. It is there to control both tags directly integrated in the website and tags via advertising. So that is where the TCF, so the Transparency and Consent Framework from IIB Europe, comes into play. And we simply did not find a solution that had this holistic approach and was already in a mature state. So that's why we decided to go ahead and continue building that solution on our own. And we also believe it makes sense, given our need as a publisher, to have that tool being interoperable with paid models and login systems. And last but not least, our core business is affected. So that's why we believe it makes sense, not only for us, but for all publishers, to have a hands-on approach regarding this topic. And that brings me to the next question. So why is it open source? So everything that we've built can be accessed by everyone. And the reason why we chose this approach is that we wanted to provide a platform for cooperation among publishers, which is going to be mutually beneficial for everybody involved, because it simply makes the OIL solution better, because more people work on it, more people think about it and contribute. And secondly, it also is a platform for cooperation regarding feedbacking or being involved in the further development of the TCF itself, because being involved in the opt-in layer project also builds the expertise that is necessary in-house to be involved in the technical discussions that are going on within IIB Europe around the IIB framework. And we believe that it makes sense for more publishers to be involved. And a last reason for this open source strategy is that we believe that it can also be a support for the adoption of the IAB framework in the industry. And that has a very practical use for us, because the more vendors use the framework, the less custom implementation effort we have with OIL. And to give you a little bit more context around this, let me show you the next slide. And there's a lot to be said about this, about implementation. But just the key message that I want to bring across here is that there's lots of different types of tags, either directly integrated in the website or that come via advertising, that have to be implemented regarding OIL in different ways. And the easiest is always if a tag understands the standardized APIs of the IAB framework. So that's why we want adoption to increase. And for all other tags, there's also a solution. It's not that it's not possible to integrate other types of tags, it's just a little bit more work. And we just wanted to bring this across, that there's integration effort involved. And this also ties back to the open source project, because with another major publisher in Germany, Burda, we are currently working on a database for the integration of non-TCF compliant tags. And with that, I want to hand over to my colleague Sebastian Waschnik, who is giving you a little bit more technical context.
So, hi, here's Sebastian. I'm one of the engineers who built the actual solution. And before I show you the product demo and the real life demo, I will go to the roadmap and the current features. So what we currently have is like an opt-in for a single domain and an opt-in for groups. We call it power opt-in. So for example, all German Axel Springer websites can share one opt-in. We don't believe that the proposed web-wide opt-in via a central domain from the framework, from the IAB framework, is currently viable, because it's legally not doable, especially not in Germany. So, but what is legally okay is like having a group, if you name the group for which websites the consent is valid. So that's why we built like this group opt-in. We also have like a privacy center where you can toggle in and out the normal purposes. And of course, we have a lot of events, customization options, and etc. What we are currently working on is more possibilities for the audit trail and reporting. As Johannes already mentioned, we're working together with other German publishers who also contribute to the project, because we don't offer like a managed service. So there's no central database. We have no central database where you can just store the audit trail. So there need to be other solutions, a lot of more documentation, how you can do it on your own. We are also working together with the contributors of the AMP framework to make OIL compatible to the AMP framework for accelerated mobile pages, because a lot of our websites generate a lot of revenue with it. And currently we only have one design option, or like CPC option. CPC stands for Cookie Preference Center or Advanced Settings. But as we have a lot of different brands, and every brand has their own ideas of how like an advanced settings or cookie preference center should look like, we will offer multiple options. And last but not least, soft tag blocking. I will come to this in the end. That's all features we're currently working on. They will all be part of the open source project, and they will be released in like a 2-week cycle. What we have planned for later this year, or autumn, better said autumn, is like a concept for persistent consent via single sign-on solutions, more about generic tracking and reporting plugins, and then mobile app SDK. We're also currently working on a back office solution to make the configuration of OIL easier. As I already said, it's no managed service. You can look into the code, you can use it, you can implement it, but there's no back office where you just can drag and drop every component and you have a final solution. We don't have that, as it is an open source project. So now it's time for the demonstration. First of all, as I already said, it's an open source project. You can just go to github.com. It's a source code management provider. It's free. And you can just search for OIL or OIL.js, and you will find our repository where you have all the code, you can use it. There's everything you need. It's highly optimized. It's really small file size. It has asynchronous calls to load the front end only if needed, and all the documentation is also available. So what we have is a full documentation. You can just click on full documentation and you have the full documentation, which is really in depth. You can find everything there, what you need. You can read about every configuration option you have. And of course, you can always just contact us, ask about it, or you can fork the code, work on it with us. What you also have is a demo site where we have an active AppNexus integration if you want to understand the IAB framework in depth. We tested all calls with a real website where we really display advertisement. There's also an HTML integration example where you have a full configuration example, how you can host it yourself. And of course, there are the release notes. The release notes are also part of GitHub. With every release we build, you get in-depth details what has changed. And in the upcoming weeks, we will also have our roadmap displayed directly on GitHub. As for the actual website, it's oil.axelspringer.com. We only built it in like 3 months ago as a small website for internal use. But as we decided to open source the project right before the 25th of May, it's unfinished. In the next 1 or 2 weeks, we will release a new website, which is a little more marketing friendly. The next question is, who uses our product? For example, all Hubert Border Media websites, which they have a huge portfolio with different websites, they all have the all.js consent banner displayed. If you just go to any website, you see this design, it's most likely our open source tool. And of course, as we come from an A/B testing background, in the last year, we tested a lot of different variations of the layer, to have it on the top, to have it like more of a pop-up, different texts. Welt.de, which you can see in the background, is one of the biggest newspapers in Germany. We also tested like a pre-rolled video. The video is in German, so I'm sorry, but you can see we tested it. It's like 6 seconds long. It performed really, really bad. Users didn't like it. But the point I wanted to drive is you can easily integrate even a pre-rolled video in our solution, and you can just change the design of the opt-in layer to your likings. This is a design, for example, we built to ship it if we would legally be required to ship an opt-in layer or a cookie banner. We have like a one-click solution to display it on build.de, which is Germany's biggest newspaper, and we customize the design to make it a little bit smaller. By default, the opt-in layer has 2 designs, a dark one and a light one. You have these companies belonging to Axel Springer. That's why it's a link to display all websites belonging to this group, because you're legally required to list all groups for or companies and websites for which the opt-in is valid. And of course, there's more information where you have a cookie preference center. You can also style this cookie preference center to your likings. For example, the consent times or consent paths, they used our solutions as our solution and customized the design. So at the bottom, you have all the windows from the IAB framework. You can also activate everything by default. You can configure if the default is everything enabled or everything disabled. Of course, you can go back. And the next is the dark theme for websites which require dark theme. As you can see, the URL is like a demo URL, which is public. So we have a lot of demos online. They are all linked on the GitHub page. You can just try them out as implementation examples. And the last thing we have is like a little tool to help you understand all the codes you have. You can implement in a site, and you can just do demo calls. For example, this is the get vendor consents call, and you can use it to test the integration of the opt-in layer. You can see which version is integrated of the opt-in layer, and all logging statements from our tool, they are only visible if you activate a verbose mode. There are possible preview modes, and you can show the current configuration of the website. So the last thing I want to show you is how can you integrate the layer in your website. This is a little bit more technical, as we don't offer a managed service. You need to integrate it on your own. So the first thing you need is a so-called stub. This one is a small code snippet which caches every call to the IAB framework, even if the actual CMP is not loaded. The second thing you need on your website is the actual script. This is this one. And the last thing is the configuration. So this is an in-depth example for the configuration, which shows you how to configure nearly everything. So in most cases, you don't need to configure everything because there are sane defaults, of course. But I just wanted to show you the way you configure it. So in the future, in like 4 weeks, we will have also a back office which you can set up. If you have more websites, it makes more sense to configure it in a central point and create distributions for every website. But this is an upcoming feature. So that's all we want to show you. So if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Thanks a lot. Oh, and could you just unmute yourself so I know which one of you to give presenter mode to? Okay, I think that's you there. So next we will have a presentation by Owen McGrath of Sovereign's consent tool. As I said, if you have questions for Axel Springer, you can feel free to ask them in the questions pane. I see there's already one, so if you could copy that format, I don't know if you can see other people's questions, but basically first as Axel Springer, so I know to ask them the question later. So without any further ado, go ahead, Owen.
Hi, thanks everyone. My name is Owen McGrath. I'm a product manager here at Sovereign. So a little bit of background on Sovereign. Our mission is to empower publishers to do more of what they love and less of what they don't. So very core to that mission and very relevant to this discussion is obviously advertising. We have SSP technology that helps publishers monetize. But when GDPR came about, we thought it really important as an SSP provider, but also as a company to empower publishers to provide a CMP for publishers to help them in their business and to help them be compliant, because it naturally was a little bit daunting, and we also saw quite a few, much of the industry pushing a lot of the onus and the legal responsibility onto the publisher. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to take you through a short demo of our dashboard, which we call Meridian, where we do our configurations, and I'll show you how to configure our CMP and and a quick demo live and see what that looks like on site. So I'm showing my screen now. I can get this. And so this here is our dashboard for Meridian. This is my personal employee account. So naturally, I don't have much earnings right now because it's just a demo site without real ads or traffic. But this is our main dashboard here, where all of our publishers go to understand their business and also to implement the various tools and solutions that we offer. So in there is our ad tags solution. So I'm going to drill in here. So this is where publishers can set up standard ad tags. And then I'm going to draw your attention to OneTag. And OneTag is a product that we have where via a single line of JavaScript, we can deploy all of our additional technologies that require the publisher to put code directly on their page. We know that it's annoying for publishers and tedious for publishers to always be changing that code. So via this single line of JavaScript, they can test and deploy and take down various technologies. So this is a list of containers. You would normally have one of these containers for each URL of your, your publishing properties or a group of URLs. I, of course, have created many demos, so bear with me here with a little bit of the clutter. But I've created a container specifically for this IAB demo, so I'm going to drill in there. And I'll just quickly draw your attention before I look to the CMP that this is where we would add multiple different types of technologies. So we have some high impact units of like a white space and a sticky overlay. We have a product called VET Reload, which VET stands for Viewable Engaged Time, which is a way that we can measure when a user is in view. An ad is in view and a user is engaged, and we can reload and create new inventory. Header bidding, I'm sure everybody knows what that is. And then finally, our consent management platform. So all via this code, all via the single OneTag solution is where we can deploy all the various code for these different solutions. And that was also important for publishers because many of the publishers could implement our CMP without having to update any code on their page, aside from the stub, because they already had a one-tag container on their page. So if I drill in here, I'm going to show you how we've configured this. And our goal here was to make this quite customizable for a publisher, but within certain limits. Naturally, of course, we're also learning, and this product is evolving as we see how the market responds to GDPR and how regulators respond, and when we see how that it gets enforced. But we wanted to help publishers customize according to their publisher experience, but we also wanted to make sure that we weren't enabling publishers to go crazy and maybe flout the rules a little bit with what they felt like was a CMP, but that was pushing the boundaries too much. So in that main page, this is where we would integrate and customize our messaging. So the first message of just a welcoming users to the site, that's customizable, as is the following optional message. And then we did put in some required messaging as well to let publishers know, so that publishers could let their users know exactly, you know, what was going on here with GDPR, so they can understand that. And then finally, 3 buttons, effectively yes,
Take the
no,
shot, dude.
and more information. Sorry, was there a question there?
No, I think one of your colleagues might have joined.
Okay.
Here, so someone was speaking, not realizing
Okay.
that they were not muted.
Okay, I'll carry on then. So again, if you look here, these are customizable to an extent. They have choices. So you can do not consent, disagree, or no thanks, something more informal. But all of these are required, and we wanted to reduce the amount of customization, at least in these first iterations. So moving on, we can obviously change the colors as well. I'll show you live what that looks like, but I kept a simple color palette here, but sometimes publishers wanted to add brighter colors or model it to their site's design. So you can toggle this on if you like, and I have this for demo purposes, toggles on. This normally defaults off, in which case, when the CMP renders on a publisher's site, it's going to list every single vendor in the IAB list. That's not going to, and that's because for a publisher, it can be very complicated for them to understand exactly which vendors they work with when they work with an SSP, because there are obviously many DSPs plugging into that SSP. There could be data partners, and there could be passbacks. So for simplicity's sake and for maximal opt-in rates with the appropriate partners, we have we've defaulted to opt-in everybody, but if the publisher wants to manage that list, they can do so, and I'll show you that on the next page. There is a global function as well, and that's specifically whether or not you want your cookies, your consent strings to be readable by other sites, and also if you want your CMP to read cookies set by other sites, or if you want to show the CMP to every user when they come to your site. One other question here, this is sort of has to do with how often we store consent. So one of the questions that we debated a lot internally around this feature was, do we show the CMP and force the user to make a decision and therefore literally block them from the content, or do we let them click off and ignore the CMP? So if this is turned off and the user does click outside of the CMP will not render, will disappear. And that of course does not mean consent. So we set a consent string that equals no, and that will by default expire after 24 hours, because we want the publisher to get consent, obviously, if they can, but they obviously can't be too bothersome to the user by constantly showing the CMP. So that was sort of our compromise. However, if you do select this feature, it will force the user to click yes, no, or manage, and then go into manage those settings in order to get to the content. And that's a choice we gave to the publisher. The other thing was around the expiration and how often do you want to let a publisher show a new message to the publisher. So if a publisher says no, right now we're defaulting to 30 days, which gives the publisher the opportunity to ask the user again 30 days later, because that consent string will expire. This can obviously be adjustable. However, the minimum is 30 days. We don't want to be too bothersome. And then obviously if a consent is positive on behalf of the publisher, we've extended that out to default to a year. But again, you can set that as low as 30 days as well to refresh that. Finally, one thing that happened, and we ran into this issue with the CMP, and especially in these early stages of GDPR, which was that as the vendor list gets updated, every time the vendor list gets updated, it was showing the CMP fresh because it was a new set of, effectively like a new set of parameters. So we were asking the user multiple times in a week, for instance, like maybe, or every day there would be a new vendor added to the list, so it was forcing the CMP to render. So when that happens, we wanted to set a delay there so that we're not, again, bothering users. So if new users are added, you can have it wait, and a new vendor added to the list, the CMP will wait before showing for a set period of time as the publisher chooses. And that's, again, not to be too bothersome for these latecomers coming to the IAB vendor list. Here is the tool for managing the very specific vendors. So you can select all or none. And then you can go through, and this is all pulled directly direct from the IAB vendor list. So this has everybody there, and that gets updated as the IAB vendor list gets updated. This is just a standard summary of all of the settings that you've implemented as a publisher. And then finally, you write a name and you save those contents. And then you go back and you'll get a note to publish your changes. And so I'll publish this container, and that will update and push out to your website. I can just show you what that code looks like. It's this. This is just a single line of one tag code. So that's just a demo that I've made. I do have a demo page live that I made that's a little bit different, but I can show it to you here. So when you arrive to the site, you're seeing the CMP. I'm just going to quickly draw your attention by looking in to show you the one tag code is right here, and that's where we deploy that, as well as some other products as well that are relevant. So here's our CMP, and then when you consent, obviously it goes away. And then I'll just quickly inspect again, and I'll show you if I go into my cookies. You can see here is my consent string stored there. So that's all I have for you today. Thanks for your time and for your attention. And I will give it back to Chris.
Thank you very much, Owen. Great demo. I'm going to hand over presenter mode to Spencer now. Share this. You should have control now.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present the GDPR compliance tool by Share This. First, I want to express my gratitude to the IAB, not only for the time today, but for their leadership with this framework initiative. I also want to acknowledge Axel Springer, Sovereign, and all the other CMPs that have presented at these weekly IAB webinars over the past several weeks. The collaboration across the entire ecosystem has been truly inspiring, and for all the best reasons, how we can collectively respect the choices of people when it comes to their data and maintain and grow our businesses to further serve those same people. I want to especially acknowledge AppNexus for the open source code for the tool, and QuantCast for the UX inspiration, and a special thanks to Summer Simpson from QuantCast, who was so generous with her time and thoughts. So a little bit about Share This. With over 3 million domains using our sharing tools worldwide, and a significant number of those domains setting cookies for EU visitors, we quickly recognize both our responsibility and the opportunity to help spur adoption of the framework. The very heart of what we do at Share This is to help publishers discover and grow their audience. And doing whatever we can to assist them in navigating this aspect of the GDPR is both our obligation and very much in line with our publisher first ethos. So our tool is free for anyone to install and use. We don't limit it only to those sites that have our sharing tools installed. Again, the main motivation was to leverage our relationships with our millions of publishers to drive adoption of the framework. Our current feature set is what we consider to be table stakes, geo-targeting the UI to the EU only or globally, giving the publisher the ability to match their own color palette and some different language options. We also have the ability to preview the look and feel of the tool within the publisher's individual Share This dashboard. And that gives them the chance to see what it looks like without having to deploy it to a staging site or to production. So far, our top request is probably expanding the number of languages we offer. Right now, we're at 5: English, French, German, Spanish, or Dutch. Actually, the top request is probably legal advice about how to be fully GDPR compliant, but languages is definitely number one for what we can actually help with. Another common request is to customize the vendors that appear within the UI. Each publisher can currently do that by setting up a pub vendors JSON file, but given the breadth of some of our publishers and the wide range of technical knowledge and skill, it's beyond the scope of what some of them are willing or able to do. It's on our roadmap to add that ability to more easily manage the vendor list in the dashboard. And so now I'll take you a little bit through installation and what the tool looks like. As with all the Share This publisher tools, the GDPR compliance tool is simple and quick to install, just a few steps to get and install a code. You can see the one line of JavaScript that is installed, and then some optional configuration choices to make in the publisher's individual Share This dashboard. And really, that's all there is to it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time showing the UI, as I think that's pretty well understood at this point by today's attendees. The basic approach is to describe the presence of cookies and what they're used for. The user can then accept, reject, or dig in a little deeper to understand the various purposes for data collection and use. Here we see the second level of the UI, where the visitor can read definitions of the various purposes and then click deeper to view the companies under each purpose and manage permission on a vendor by vendor basis at the purpose level. From there, they can then go to the full vendor list. And here we see that full list. Again, nothing novel here, just a list of all registered vendors and the ability to opt out on a one-by-one basis. And finally, the dashboard that I've referred to previously. Here's the place where our publishers can manage all of their Share This tools. They can add or replace which social sharing channels they display to users and check their site and page level sharing statistics via our social analytics reporting. This was the natural place for GDPR customization to live as well. Just like the tool itself, a few simple options that allow the publisher to set their preferences and get on with their day. The publisher can choose to display their site name at the top of the tool, select whether to show the tool to EU visitors only or to all visitors. They can define the tool's consent scope. They can choose the language that's displayed to their visitors and customize the color that's used in their tool. And then they can preview the look and feel of the tool right here in the dashboard before deploying it. I wanted to use the balance of my time to talk about our publisher outreach plan. As I've said before, we have millions of publishers we want to help with GDPR for both their purposes and for our own. In order to keep consented data flowing for the benefit of our publishers, for our benefit at Share This, and for the industry at large, and probably a fair number of you on the webinar today, we had to implement this massive outreach program to make sure our publishers not only knew about our tool or the concept of active user consent, but the very basics of GDPR and the need for each individual publisher to know what their obligations are under GDPR. So first, we updated our publisher terms of use, and like seemingly everyone else in the world, we emailed our registered users to let them know we had made some changes that weren't the usual run-of-the-mill updates that no one reads, but vitally important ones given the impending changes from the EU. Next, we launched an email campaign announcing our GDPR compliance tool was ready to download. We linked to our publisher GDPR resources at sharethis.com, as well as the IAB's Transparency and Consent Framework site. And finally, after a few days had elapsed, we sent emails to publishers who had downloaded the tool but had not yet installed it and reminded them to do so. So far, we've been really pleased with the results. We're definitely a long way away from 100% of our publishers that set EU cookies having a consent UI in place, but we're seeing strong week-over-week growth since May 25th. And about 12% of the sites using our tool are brand new to us. They haven't been using our sharing buttons in the past. So when publishers that we had no previous relationship with sought out a consent management solution, we think that that indicates a positive trend for the widespread adoption of the framework. And that's all I have. Thanks again for your time today. It was my pleasure to share my findings with you, and I'll turn it back to Chris for the Q&A portion.